I don't know how your week has been. I have to confess it's not been the best week in the Godfrey household, and Rosie and all the kids have been really poorly and things. Evan and Annabelle are here with me, but Rosie and Simon are still kind of at home and not doing great. And it's been one of those weeks where it just kind of forces you to stop. And we've had some wonderful care from different people in the church, so thank you for that. And I say it's great that they're doing a lot better. But I don't know about you, but I hate that feeling of having to stop. And when you don't want to, and being forced to stop, forced to kind of slow down in different ways. Everything in me, and maybe some of you can relate to this, but everything in me just kind of wants to push through. And I don't know if you've had those kind of times where you're feeling really grotty and all the rest of it. You're like, I'm not going to let this stop me. And you just kind of power through and all of that kind of thing. I hate the feeling of my time being wasted. And, that feeling of brain fog where you feel like you're not kind of operating at kind of full capacity and not being as productive as you want to be. I say everything in me wants to maximize every moment. I don't know if you maybe relate to that. And our world has given us all the tools to be able to do that, hasn't it? From the invention of the light bulb that means we never have to sleep, to the invention of the mobile phone, which means we never have to disconnect. And when it comes to maximizing, every moment, for some of us that will mean kind of work and productivity. And we want to achieve things. We want to get stuff done. We want to see the day as being useful. For others, we want to maximize every moment in terms of our experience. It's all the places that we want to visit. It's keeping up with all the latest episodes of the newest series, which looks so good. It's the latest games or reading our favorite books or just kind of keeping up with what all of our friends are doing on social media and not missing a thing. And none of these are bad things, but as we fill every moment, we find it harder and harder to stop. And then we confuse rest with being entertained. Which means that even in the times when we kind of think in our minds, I'm doing this to rest, we're still kind of stimulating ourselves and putting more stuff in and kind of keeping our brains going and never really able to slow down. There was an interview a few years back now and with the CEO of Netflix. And he was asked if he was scared at the time about the growing competition with different streaming services like Amazon and Disney and things. Now, and this is a couple of years back, so it might have changed a little bit now, but this was his answer at the time. He said, no. Our number one competitor is sleep. You know something is wrong when Netflix's competitor is not Amazon or Disney, but your sleep. And do you know what? I get it. Because when I'm feeling wiped out, what do I want to do? I want to grab a big bar of chocolate or some tub of ice cream. I want to crash on the sofa with Rosie, and I want to stick on a fun episode and just kind of veg out. And then the episode comes to an end, and by that point, I'm so tired that I don't want to move, and before I know it, the next episode has started. And then even though I started the evening exhausted, I end up going to bed way later than I ever planned to. And if you've ever had an evening like that, how do you feel when you turn off that last episode? Do you feel refreshed and at peace and kind of alive? You don't, do you? You feel, wow, that was a good episode, and now I am shattered. And tomorrow I am going to pay for it. It's an escape from the demands of life, but you're not actually restored by it at all, are you? I love a good series. I'm not down on entertainment. I'm not down on kind of watching kind of things or any of that, but entertainment alone is not the rest that we need. This is how a pastor called A.J. Swoboda put it in a book that I've been reading recently. He says this. He says, our bodies wear ragged, our spirits thirst. We have an inability to simply sit still and be. As we drown ourselves in a 24/7 living, we seem to be able to do anything but quench our true thirst for the life of God. We have become perhaps the most emotionally exhausted, psychologically overworked, spiritually malnourished people in history. That's quite a statement, isn't it? And so as we look to Jesus to take his yoke on us and to learn from him his better way, he says to us that his yoke is easy and that his burden is light, and that as we learn from him, we will find rest for our souls. When it comes to learning from Jesus, he has a way of peace and a way of rest that he wants to teach us. And so as we've been doing each week over kind of recent months, I want us to look at what Jesus models to us and what Jesus teaches us. But before we do that, we're going to kind of take a bit of a step back and look at what God models to us, what God the Father models to us and teaches us, because that's what Jesus really builds on. And we're first introduced to God. I'm sure you all know this, or most of you will know this. We're first introduced to God on the first page of the Bible, Genesis 1. Where we read, in the beginning, God. And what does he do? What is happening in Genesis 1? God is at work. He's creating the heavens and the earth. And his work goes on for 6 days. And then we read this at the start of Genesis 2, verse 2. It says, by the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the seventh day, he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. And so God here models something to us. He sets an example for us to follow. For 6 days, he worked hard. Work is good. It's what the majority of our life should be doing. But then on the seventh day, he stops and he rests from his work. But even more than that, he blesses the seventh day. And so far in Genesis 1, we've only seen him to bless two things. He blesses the animals and says he blesses the animals for a purpose, to be fruitful. And then he blesses humanity, and he blesses humanity for a purpose, to be fruitful. And then he blesses the seventh day. And it doesn't say it explicitly, but I can only think that if that's the reason he blesses the animals and the people is in order that they're to be fruitful, that he blesses the seventh day for a purpose, that the seventh day would be fruitful, that the seventh day would be a day of blessing, would be a day where actually it refreshes, it restores, it accomplishes something in us, that it leads to a bearing of fruit that is not possible on any of the other 6 days. And then God makes the seventh day holy. And that just means that he made it a day that is a set-apart day, a day that is different from all of the other days. And amazingly, this day, this period of time, is the first thing that we ever see in the Bible as being called holy. And I love that God models this to us. See, do you know why I rest? I rest because otherwise I break. I rest because I get tired and worn out. But God doesn't get tired or worn out. So why does he rest? God rests because it creates space to enjoy what he has done and what he has. God models to us that rest, that internal peace comes as we enjoy what we have already done and what we already have. Rather than being caught up in the constant kind of drive to produce or to buy or to experience something new or something more. God establishes this rhythm. He models it to us, and then he establishes this rhythm in creation itself. It's the way the world, it's the way that you and I have kind of been designed to kind of find life. And when we push it against this, when we try and kind of maximize every moment, which is what I so often want to do, it's like we somehow think we're stronger or wiser or better than God. But all it really results in is the state of stress and anxiety that we see all around us in the world, and that we so often experience ourselves. You and I were designed to work 6 days and to have one day which is holy, which is set apart, which is different from all the other days, which is a day that is blessed, a day that we enjoy. The problem was that we didn't do a great job of following God's example. And so in Exodus 20, if you read on through the Bible, in Exodus 20, then in Deuteronomy 5, God kind of spells out clearly. He says, okay, you've not followed my example. I thought I made it pretty obvious. You've not followed my example, so now I'm going to give you a command. And he puts it into the 10 commandments, and he says, what I modeled to you, you need to do it too. Learn from me, follow my example. And so he gives this day that's been set apart and blessed, this day a name, and he calls it the Sabbath. Fast forward then to the time of Jesus, and the Sabbath has become a pretty big deal. Having ignored God's instructions after he's given this command, they don't really pay much attention again at a different point. And having ignored God's instructions in the past, they face the consequences of that. And so the Jewish leaders, by the time of Jesus, they don't want to be facing those consequences again. And so they want to do everything they can to make sure that as a people, they're following these rules. They're being obedient to what God has said. The problem is that work and rest are ambiguous terms, aren't they? You know, what I see as being work and what I might think of as rest could be different from what you see as work and what you might think of as rest, and vice versa. And I think, do you know what? I think God intended it that way, because it gives a lot of freedom and flexibility in what Sabbath might look like. But freedom and flexibility makes it impossible for religious leaders to control people. And so they took it upon themselves to define what work looks like, to define what rest looks like, and they created a whole bunch of rules that people had to try and kind of follow as part of it. And their rules got pretty ridiculous. There's lots of silly ones, but here's a couple that I think kind of hit home something of the seriousness rather than the silliness of how wrong their rules are. If a building collapsed and there were people trapped under that building, that's a pretty horrific situation, isn't it? You were allowed on the Sabbath to move the stones and to rescue somebody whose life was in danger, but if their life was not in danger, you had to leave them till the next day. If somebody was injured by that collapse, and their life was in danger, then the doctor was allowed to treat them. But if their life was not in danger, they had to wait until the next day for treatment. It's just wrong, isn't it? You couldn't travel more than what they called a Sabbath day journey, which meant that you could walk up to 1,999 steps, but not one step more. Those of you who do your kind of 10,000 steps a day are probably freaking out at that point. You know, but what starts out as a good desire to obey God becomes twisted as they're so fixated on obeying rules that they've created that they miss God's heart. The Sabbath is twisted by the Jewish leaders so that it isn't a blessed day that they enjoy anymore. It's a burden. And this is the world that Jesus lives in. This is what's going on, which is why we see Jesus clash with the Jewish leaders over the Sabbath again and again and again. This is what we see in Mark chapter 2. It says, one Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields. And as his disciples walked along, they began to pick some heads of grain. The Pharisees said to him, "Look, why are they doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath?" They're picking grain because they're hungry. They've been going for a walk. If they've got hungry on a walk, they've probably walked a little bit more than 1,999 steps. I don't get hungry that quick. But so they've probably walked further than they're meant to. They're a bit hungry, so they're picking the grains. And so the Sabbath, as far as the Pharisees is concerned, they're breaking the rules that they've created. But Jesus answers them. He says, have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need? In the days of Abiathar, the high priest, he entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread, which is lawful only for priests to eat. And he also gave some to his companions. Then he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. And then if you read on what goes on, and then in Mark chapter 3 is where we read about how Jesus heals another man on a Sabbath. And it wasn't a life-threatening thing. The guy's hand was withered. He'd lived with it for a long time. He could have waited till the next day, but Jesus doesn't let it wait till the next day. He says, I want to bring healing to you today. And so he heals the man's hand on the Sabbath and makes the Jewish leaders angry. And so Jesus asks them, which is lawful on the Sabbath? To do good or to do evil? To save life or to kill? You see, Jesus isn't opposed to the Sabbath. He's not breaking the Sabbath in what it is that he's doing. He's just breaking some of these extra rules that the Jewish leaders have created around it. And he wants to open their eyes to the way in which they've twisted the Sabbath from what it's meant to be. They missed God's heart. And I love the statement that he makes as part of this when he's trying to get this across, when he says that Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. In other words, Sabbath is a gift. It's for your good. It's meant to be a blessing to you. And the Pharisees missed this because they made it a burden, not a blessing. They made all of the focus on these rules and regulations. And do you know, at different points in history, the church has been guilty of doing the same. Now, if the Sabbath was meant to be a gift, maybe think of it like this. As far as and this is kind of the way I think it was working for the Jewish leaders. You know, God had given them this gift. And the Jewish leaders, they knew it was precious. But they thought that it was so precious that they needed to protect it. And so they took the gift and they put the gift in a box and they said, no one can open that box. No one's allowed to touch that box. We've got to keep this safe. And that's sad, isn't it? Because it meant that they missed out on the gift. But in our world, and even I think in Western church culture today, I don't think that's our problem. I think our problem when we think of Sabbath as a gift looks a little bit more like this. God has given us this gift. And we look at the gift and we kind of think, well, why would I want that? How could I possibly make use of that? That there's so much to do, that there's so much that I don't want to miss out on. What use have I got for a gift that invites me to stop? And so the gift just kind of lies there, forgotten. And that's even sadder, isn't it? And this is something that God has really convicted me of doing in my own life. Not on purpose. You know, I've tried to take a day off once a week, and I've called that my Sabbath. But the reality is that the only thing that's different about that day is that I don't do any paid work. Plenty of work still goes on. It's the day when I've got to do everything else that needs to be done, the DIY jobs around the house, the gardening, the cleaning, the shopping, all the things that I want to try and get done as a family that we don't have time for on the other days. And so it's a day that is just as full, a day when I'm just as much trying to maximize every moment, a day with just as much pressure and kind of keeping going and speed as every other day has. And so one of the things that I've been wrestling with, and I'm still wrestling with if I'm honest, is how to learn from Jesus a better way when it comes to Sabbath. I don't want it to be a forgotten gift in my life. when God has given it for our good. It's a day that he has blessed and made to be different from all the other days. And as I've been trying to think about what a Sabbath looks like, a day that is holy, a day that is set apart and different, there are three questions that I've kind of found helpful to kind of frame things. And I want to encourage you to ask yourself just three questions to help you to kind of think through. Is this something for me to do on the Sabbath? Or is this something for one of my 6 other days in the week? First question is this. Will it help me to stop? Will it help me to stop? You see, the most literal translation of the word Sabbath is simply to stop, to cease, to stop and rest for the day. Not just to stop from paid work, but to completely stop. And that's what God models to us in Genesis. And we see a great example of this, I think, the next time Sabbath talks about it. The next time Sabbath talks about it is actually just before the Ten Commandments. It's Exodus chapter 16. The Israelites, they're going through the wilderness, and God has promised to provide for them every day the food that they need with manna and with quail. But he only gives it them for one day, and he says, go out on that day and collect up what you need on that one day, but don't take any extra. And when they try and take extra, it just goes moldy for the next day. But he says, on the 6th day, take extra. On the 6th day, take enough for both days. And when they do that, it doesn't go moldy. It's amazing. It actually stays fresh for the next day. And God's trying to teach them through all of this how to do life in a way that's dependent on him, in a way in which they trust him day by day, in a way in which they know that actually they don't have to go out and do stuff on the 7th day because God will provide for them everything that they need in the other days on the 6th day as part of that. And you know, that's not a picture of people stopping from paid work, but a picture of people stopping, of putting down and resting from the pressure and the work of simply providing for and taking care of their family. Knowing that God will provide enough on the other days to cover that one day. That they can be reliant and dependent on God, that they can trust him. You see, we need to physically rest and stop. But we also need to mentally rest and stop. To rest from problem solving and carrying responsibility. And ultimately that comes down to letting go of our sense of control. Letting go of the idea that everything is reliant on us, that if I don't do this, it's all going to fall apart. And instead embracing the truth that we are dependent on God and that we can trust him. Mark Buchanan puts it like this in his book. He says, Sabbath is about trust. Sabbath is turning over to God all those things, our money, our work, our status, our reputations, our plans, our projects, that we're otherwise tempted to hold tight in our own closed fist, hold onto for dear life. It's a day when we stop holding on and let go. A day when we stop and rest physically, emotionally, and mentally. And that means so much more than just stopping paid work. I think part of it is to stop chasing and pursuing. To stop looking for the more we don't have so that we create space to enjoy what we do. That's what God models to us in Genesis, isn't it? He stops creating the more so that he can enjoy what he has. To have a day off then from shopping and browsing for stuff so that you're able to slow down and enjoy. Create that space to enjoy what you have already. And I don't know about you, but something in me finds this hard. You know, when I first stop my immediate feeling is not rest or peace, but it's agitation. I feel agitated, and I kind of have this pull to fill that moment with something, to pick up my phone or to do something else. But it's as we stop as an act of faith and trust, as we stop as an act of obedience to our great God, that we create space to be refreshed and restored and to really receive his blessings. And that's why the second question, I think, is so important. Not only will it help me to stop, but will it help me to enjoy his blessings? Because God blessed the Sabbath day. It's a day that's meant to be a gift to us. It's meant to be one that we enjoy. You know, I think there's a reason why Jesus so often healed on the Sabbath day. Again and again, that's the times that we hear about Jesus healing, because it's meant to be a day of healing and restoration. I love the way a guy called Dan Allender talks about this in his book. He says this: the Sabbath is an invitation to enter delight. Isn't that wonderful? The Sabbath, when experienced as God intended, is the best day of our lives. Without question or thought, it is the best day of the week. Sabbath is the holy time where we feast, play, dance, sing, pray, laugh, tell stories, read, paint, walk, and watch creation in its fullness. And again, this is what God models to us in Genesis. He stopped and rested, not because he was tired, but to take time to enjoy the creation he had made. You know, I want to encourage you. I've been trying to do this a little bit. I don't find it very easy. I'm not good at being, I'm great at being intentional in some ways, but in other ways I'm really not. But I want to encourage you to come and approach the Sabbath like a weekly celebration. You know, when it comes to kind of birthdays and different stuff, Rosie tends to be the one who organizes and plans and gets stuff done, and I just kind of focus on everything else in the week, and then I turn up for the birthday and everything's done. But Sabbath kind of needs that bit of pre-planning, that bit of focus that you use to plan for a birthday or a holiday, so that you look forward to it and you anticipate it as this day which is going to be great, the day that you can enjoy the most more than any other day in the week. The day that's going to feed you and restore your soul. To enjoy all of the good things that God has given you. And all the good ways that God has wired you. You know, whether that's playing games with your family. Annabelle's up here now. Hi, Annabelle. And she was talking about wanting to play some games later on when I was asking her, what would you find? What would bring you joy for us to do today? Or it's getting out for a walk or reading a good book or hanging out with your friends or simply enjoying good food, having your favorite meal. What can you do for 24 hours that will fill your soul with joy? Isn't that a wonderful question to stop and think about? What can you do for 24 hours that will fill your soul with joy? Not just distract you or entertain you, but actually restore you and refresh you. Will mean that at the end of the day, you don't go to bed exhausted, but feeling that sense of being blessed and at peace. Sabbath is about a lot more than just saying no to work and no to activity. I think historically that's so often what we end up boiling it down to, all the stuff that we're not to do. It's about saying yes to delight and yes to God's blessing. So will it help me to stop, and will it help me to enjoy God's blessing? And then the third question is this: will it help me to worship? You see, in Genesis, God made the seventh day holy. A day that's set apart and different from all the other days. And then in Exodus 20, when we read about the 10 Commandments, and God kind of refers back to this, he tells them to keep it holy. He's the one who made it holy. We're to keep it holy, to keep it as different in the way that he's made it different. And then he goes on to say that the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. So it's a day that is holy, a day that is set apart to the Lord. It's not a day that is all about me or all about us. It's a day that is all about him. And so we stop as an act of dependence on him and trust in him. We create space to be blessed by him and enjoy the good things that he's given us. And as we do that, there's a pattern here. When you stop, you create the space you're able to enjoy, and then it stirs your heart to say, thank you. To worship him, to honor him, to praise him for who he is, for what he's given you, for what he's done. To make time to simply be with him. And I think this is why, even though I believe that we're free to have the Sabbath on whatever day that we want, that wherever possible, the best thing is for us to make Sabbath a day when we gather together with other believers and fix our eyes on Jesus. Take time out of the midst of the rest of life to be with others who help us in our worship. And I know with shift patterns and different things that Sundays don't work for everybody, but for most people they do. And where it doesn't, maybe you could try and take Sabbath on the day when you get together with your growth group. Or build in on your Sabbath day, just that space to catch up with the recording of the service if you've not been able to be here. So that your Sabbath doesn't become a day that is all about you just like the other 6. But is a day set apart unto the Lord. A day that's all about him. So 3 questions. Will it help me to stop? Will it help me to enjoy his blessings? And will it help me to worship? And if the answer to all 3 of those is no, then you've got 6 other days for it. And these are important questions because Sabbath will never happen accidentally. This is something that you need to be intentional about, and that actually takes a bit of forward planning, like I talked about with the holidays. It's a way of life that Jesus is inviting you into, and it's a way of finding peace and rest in him in the way that we all crave and we long for. And what it looks like will be different for you than it is for me. And that is absolutely fine. I think where we've so often gone wrong in the past is trying to define, like the Jewish leaders, this is what it needs to be and hold everybody to it. But this isn't about a bunch of rules to follow. This isn't about a legalistic kind of program. It's about embracing a gift that God has given us for our good. Rosie and I, as I said, we're still trying to work out what this really looks like for us. And we've been experimenting and trying stuff. And I've got to be honest, sometimes that's been good. Sometimes it's not gone so well. There's a few things that I'm aiming for as I look to learn from Jesus, that maybe these aren't things that you need to do, but maybe just sometimes I think hearing from somebody else how they're processing stuff helps you to think it through for yourself and what it could look like in your kind of life and the way God's made you. So my first thing is I realized pretty quickly that my day off did not make for a good Sabbath. It's the day, as I said, when I need to do all the other work that's got to be done that I'm not paid to do. It's got to get done at some point. And it's not a day when I gather together with any other believers. It's not a day when I gather together with other people to worship. And so what we're experimenting with is making Sunday our Sabbath. And that gets a bit messy for me in terms of things with church being my workplace and kind of goes away against conventional advice that you tend to be given as a pastor. But, I really see this time as us gathering together as a church family, and each and every one of us comes and plays our part in the body, the part that God has called us to be and to do, and this just happens to be mine. We all serve in different ways. We all play our part in different ways. We all give in different ways. And that's part of our worship. It's part of us just being the body together. Just as I think it would have been for the priests and for the Jewish leaders, as much as they had all of these rules, their Sabbath was still the day when they came together in the synagogue or in the temple. But outside of our time gathered together on a Sunday, I stop from work. I don't do emails, and I don't plan in extra meetings. And then as I've thought about what helps me to stop, the big thing that I'm trying to do with mixed success is put aside or turn off my phone. To have a break from social media, from browsing the news, or doing online shopping, or all the other 100 things that we use phones for these days. We're trying to clean the house and cook a meal the day before, so that on a Sunday, housework is kind of kept to a minimum. It's a day when we don't put a load of washing in the washing machine or anything like that. Because, it's not just about me being able to stop, but it's about Rosie being able to stop, and us as a family being able to stop. And then it's finding the things that help us to enjoy God's blessings. Enjoy the things that he's given us. Ways that we can enjoy being together as a family. Going for a walk, snuggling with a film. Playing a game, enjoying our favorite snacks. Yesterday I took the kids and we happened to be in a shop, and so I said, pick whatever sweets you want, and there'll be a treat for tomorrow. Space though to get time for myself to read, to pray, to think, to simply be with God. And it's an experiment. And we will probably change things over time. It's not that this is the way it has to be, but this is my way of trying to go, how do I follow you better in this, Jesus? And what you do might look completely different to that, and that is absolutely fine. But I want to encourage you, whatever it looks like, to be intentional about a Sabbath. Whether you work or you're retired, one day needs to look different from all the others. Whether you have children or you don't, to have one day a week when you stop, when you create space to enjoy God's blessings, and when you worship. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put those 3 questions on the screen in a moment, and I want to encourage you just to take a couple of minutes to think through what could this look like for me and for my family. Before I do that, I want to read over you a beautiful blessing and a promise from God in Isaiah 58, and then I'm going to pray for you. Because I believe this is God's invitation to you today. This was his words through the prophet Isaiah. He says this: if you keep your feet from breaking the Sabbath and from doing as you please on my holy day, if you call the Sabbath a delight and the Lord's holy day honorable, and if you honor it not by going your own way and not doing as you please or speaking idle words, then you will find your joy in the Lord. And I will cause you to ride in triumph on the heights of the land, and to feast on the inheritance of your father Jacob. For the mouth of the Lord has spoken. This isn't a day of just giving you one more thing you've got to try and do in the midst of a busy life. This is God's saying, I want to give you a gift. I want to bless you. I want to restore you. I want to help you to enjoy the life that I've given you. Why don't we just pray? Heavenly Father, we just want to look to you and we just want to say thank you that that's your heart for us. Thank you that your heart is for our good, that you are a good Father who looks to bless your children. Thank you, God, that this is something, a way of life that you've modeled to us. And if you do it, it's got to be the best way. And Lord, right now, we just recognize that all the ways in which we've allowed your gift to us to lie forgotten, as we've thought we knew better and just got on with doing life the way we want. I just want to ask that you would come now and you would just minister your grace, your forgiveness to each one of us, that we would know that as we look to you, as we confess that there is no guilt, but there is freedom as you forgive and you make us new. But I pray you'd not just forgive us, but you would make new our mindsets, that you would renew our thinking, that it would no longer be a gift that is forgotten, but one that we unwrap, one that we cherish, one that we enjoy, one that we play with, one that we make use of, that we might discover all the good that you have for us, that you intend for us with this way of doing life, that we might embrace your better way. Teach us and lead us in it. Help us to be intentional about it. And I pray that every single one of us would then have stories of the way in which we've found joy in you, the way in which you've lifted us up to ride on the heights, to feast on your goodness, on what you have for us. That we might have stories of the wonder of our great God and the gifts that he works in our lives. So come and lead us in your ways by your Spirit, Lord, in Jesus' name.